Welcome, everyone, to another edition of the show. I'm your host, Titus, joined as always by the Russell. What's up, David?
Hey, what's up, buddy?
So we lost an apologist this week, didn't we?
Yes, we did. Norm Geisler.
Yeah, I remember our small group at church going through his book, When Skeptics Ask, and I remember it blowing all of our minds. It was one of the first apologetics books I've ever read, and probably the only apologetics book they ever read. So it was tough, but it stretched our minds. And yeah, I'm sure you have followed his material a lot more than I have even.
Oh, yeah, I've read quite a few of his works. The biggest one being I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. That was a big one that was co-authored by Frank Turek. So I read that one more than once. But yeah, I'm familiar with, some other of his works. But, I didn't have much time to really think about his death because my great uncle died on the same day. So
oh my word,
it's been kind of hectic. So
yeah, sorry about that, man. That does sound like a rough week. You're your apologist hero and your great uncle.
Yeah, he's one of them. I mean, William Lane Craig is probably my biggest, but he was very early on one of the people I read and listened to, and yeah, had a big impact on my faith. So
did he do theology too, or mostly just apologetics?
Yes, I'm pretty sure he did mostly apologetics, but I'm pretty sure he had some systematic theology books too, if I can remember correctly. I don't want to say because I don't have the information right up here in front of me.
Yeah. So that's a morbid way to get the show started, which is fitting because the topic we're going to be tackling today is definitely not a light one. For those of you who are not sort of in the conservative Mennonite bubble, including you, David, I'll give a little introduction to what this is all about. So there's been I don't even know what to call it, a scandal, I guess would be the right word, within the largest conservative Mennonite humanitarian aid group and mission organization called Christian Aid Ministries. And what happened is they had a volunteer, Jeriah Mast, who had been working for them in Haiti and doing humanitarian aid work down there. And it just came to light probably about a month ago that he had been sexually abusing young boys in Haiti. And eventually, as more details have been coming out, he confessed to abusing over 30 victims in the United States and in Haiti over, I think, like a 20-year period, which it's really terrible. But what made this whole situation even worse is that it became clear that there were certain people within the leadership of Christian Aid Ministries who had known about Jeriah Mast and known about what he was doing. And they not only did not report him, but they also continued to allow him to work with young boys there in Haiti. And there was actually a time when they sent him home for a while, but when he quote-unquote repented, they allowed him to come back. His church apparently also knew about it. So this has created a huge stir on social media, a huge outrage, as is rightfully so. And one person who's been especially criticizing Christian Aid Ministries and speaking out for the victims in this situation is Trudi Metzger from Ontario, Canada. She's joining us today on the Skype line. Her blog is splash4ripples, /4ripples.com. She's also the author of Between Two Gods, a memoir of abuse in the Mennonite community. So she's going to be helping us think through this today. Thanks for coming on the show, Trudi.
Thank you for having me.
Also joining us today to help us think through this is a blogger, Asher Witmer. He's a blogger within the conservative Mennonite community. His blog is asherwhitmer.com. He's also the author of Live Free, Making Sense of Male Sexuality. So he's going to be in dialogue with us today, helping us to process this. He's been on the show before, but we're glad to welcome him back. Thanks for joining, Asher.
Thanks for having me. It's good to be back.
Yeah, so I'm going to start with you, Trudi. Could you give us a little bit of a rundown about sort of how you first became interested in raising awareness about sexual abuse, specifically within the conservative Mennonite community, and for how long you've been doing it and kind of how that's looked for you?
Yeah, so I started in 2010 formally addressing sexual abuse, but I will say up front, it was never intended to be about the Anabaptist community. That was one of those God accidents or whatever you want to call it. It wasn't planned. I grew up in a conservative Mennonite home, but with, quite a few unique flavors. I was born into an old colony, Russian Mennonite, Mexican Mennonite, there's a whole bunch of little names that we go by, that people know us by. And my parents left that when I was 9 months old, so I didn't really experience it, but that's my background. And then from there, we went to the Kleine Gemeinde. This would have been in Mexico. Now, the Kleine Gemeinde would have been a very evangelical compared to the old colony, sort of an evangelical group. We stayed there till I was 5, and at that point we moved to Canada. In Canada, well, even in Mexico, I didn't go to church much. Like, we'd go to basically weddings and funerals, probably for the food, but kids didn't go to church. So that wasn't really a part of my growing up. When I was 9, going on 10, we met the conservative Mennonite people here in Ontario, and that was actually a really good thing in our lives, especially at first, and in some ways has remained that. I value it. I thank God for it. The first couple was a bishop and his wife, whom we met at a cousin's party, a dinner party, and they just kind of took us under their wings spiritually and cared about my dad. To give you a bit of context there, my father was definitely a child molester. I wouldn't say pedophile. He did not, have a preference for children, but he definitely molested numerous children, some family, some friends. And for him, that started at age 13. So he was a very troubled man. There was a lot of abuse and violence in our home. Well, this bishop and his wife actually entered into my dad's world and really cared about him and about us kids. And so that was just a really freeing, beautiful thing for us. Within months, we moved into a conservative Mennonite community. My parents joined the church. I would have been almost 10 at the time. And eventually I joined as well. So my childhood was actually riddled with a lot of sexual abuse, violence, a lot of darkness that way. And then it kind of calmed down while in the conservative church. I wasn't sexually abused again until I was about, I want to say 14. I don't know for sure how old I was. I'd have to figure out, I remember who the teacher was, so I'd have to piece it together. But it was around age 14 that the man who later became my bishop, his son, so he was a church leader, the church leader's son molested me. And we would later find out that he had actually molested quite a few kids. But not only that, he had first been extremely violated by this man who would come into our community and molest young men. So it had this trickle effect of him then, at age 16, somewhere in there, molesting a whole lot of us. And even before that, I don't know how old he was when he started. So the whole topic of sexual abuse, and particularly to the Anabaptist community, is my story and the story of many of my friends. However, when I started into it in 2010, I actually did so in a missionary church. I had no intentions of targeting the Anabaptist community, but from the very first conference, that's who came. There was a good percentage the first conference that showed up. And I remember this woman who helped me with the conference afterwards took me aside and she's like, "So are you targeting them? Is this sort of your calling?" And I'm like, "Are you kidding me?" I was like, "They would never receive me. They wouldn't hear me. I couldn't. And no, I'm not targeting them." But by default, that's what actually happened. No matter where I travel, where I speak, that's who comes and that's who connects with me, because my story connects with them, and they want freedom. That's just how it kind of came to be.
Wow. Asher, you have a blog that connects with a lot of conservative Mennonites. Is sexual abuse a reoccurring theme that comes up in emails you get and that sort of thing?
I haven't, that's not my story, so I haven't written on it a whole lot.
Yeah.
But I have heard of stories, I've done some writing on, dealing with pornography or even same-sex attraction and stuff, and have gotten tons of feedback about that. And sprinkled in there is quite a bit about being sexually molested. A surprising amount to me.
Okay. Now, here's the question I have, and either of you or both of you can respond to this. I know that when a Christian group, it comes to light that there's been sexual abuse within it, it always makes headlines. It's a really big deal, rightfully so. You know, we're supposed to be representing Jesus, and it's so terrible. But would you say that you think that within the conservative Mennonite world, there's a higher per capita rate of sexual abuse, or is it just that it's so shocking that, you know, this group of people would also be engaging in this sort of thing?
Are you addressing that to either or both of us?
Go ahead, Trudi.
Okay. All right. So I would say in some of the Anabaptist groups, the rates appear to be higher. I have to be really careful with saying that because there's no studies done. I can only speak about communities that I've been involved with, both in Canada and US, and then also my childhood, like the old colony background. I would definitely say in my old colony background, it is exponentially higher. But even laying that aside, because that's not really the Anabaptist groups that I work with now, in the what we always called the white bonnet, white cap Mennonites, those Anabaptist groups, I would say in some churches, I can't say in all of them, but the rates are higher by all appearances. And I say that based on actually having created spreadsheets about several communities that I've worked with the parents or the children, now adults, but in one community in particular, there was a group of us moms talking, and we figured out that in a 10-year span, the children in a 10-year age span, all but one had been molested. That's pretty significant.
Yeah, no kidding. I actually know someone who has been sort of an advocate for victims in a certain part of Pennsylvania, and he told me that in this certain geographic area in Pennsylvania that he has had people come to him from every one of the plain churches except for maybe one and speak out about being sexually abused. So at least in that area, it seems like the rates are higher. But like you said, if there's no real statistical reports that have been done or research that's been done, it is hard to say. Asher, do you have anything you wanted to say about that?
No, my thought was about the stats. Like, we don't have any hard data, so it's hard to say. Obviously, like when I'm blogging about pornography or something, it comes back. It looks like, man, everybody's into this, right? Because I just blogged about that, and so everybody that is into it is responding to it. So it's really hard for me to actually get a good feel for what the demographic or what the statistics would be. But just to dovetail on your question, can I ask a question?
Sure.
To Trudy? What is this is to Trudy. Do you know, like, those child molestations that happened in the 10-year gap there, was that primarily from adults, or was it like older youth, or is there?
So it started with one child being molested, and then, if I remember right, this has been quite a few years ago. If I remember right, he was around age 12, and he ended up molesting most of the rest of the kids, and then there was, those kids molesting one another. And that's what I was going to say, actually, is that often it's the young teens, preteens that start it. It doesn't stay there. They will continue on until I see it often around age 16. It's like they have this sort of awakening of, this is wrong, I don't want to do this, but they're trapped in this cycle that they've gotten into because nobody talked about it. Nobody knew what to say. Maybe nobody knew it was happening. Nobody knew what they were doing. Or they were molested and went to someone for help. Their parents, some do, and nobody seems to know what to do about it. And I think that's a huge contributing factor, is that this is not talked about. There's not parents sitting down with the young man who's been molested to say, this is not your fault. I'm really sorry this happened. Let's get you some help. Let's talk through this. Let's find out who you are as a young man, and really reaffirm their identity, because that's really what it steals from a young man, a young woman, a young child.
Yeah. What do you think within the conservative Mennonite world makes this a problem that hasn't been addressed very well, Trudi?
Wow. Yeah, that's very loaded, very multifaceted. I think there's the combination of not talking about sexuality to start with, like who talks to their 1-year-old and explains, this is your penis, this is your vagina, this is who you are sexually, this is how you're created, this is how God made you, and it's good. We don't tend to do that. It's really hard to do that as parents who haven't been accustomed to that kind of conversation. I think that's a good starting point right there, is to talk about it, and that's not happening with most. And then walking them through their sexuality as they grow up. And then there's the parts that actually contribute versus what's not happening. There's also so you don't have this conversation about sex happening, but you have every Sunday in some churches, not all, again, many wouldn't do this. And some people are going to be like, no, that doesn't happen every Sunday. But in some churches, pretty much every Sunday, you will hear something about how you should or should not dress, what's modest and what's not. And is the dress long enough? And is the cape wide enough? And is the covering big enough? And so everything is about covering and shame. And there's this curiosity about what are we so ashamed of and what are we covering up? And it actually works against that innocence and that purity that's trying to be achieved.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Asher, one thing that conservative Mennonites hold very dear is the doctrine of non-resistance. And that's something that I know that you and I both hold on to also. How would you apply that theology in a case of sexual abuse?
So you had asked me if you could ask that question here. So I've been thinking about it, and just in all transparency, I hadn't thought about it until a month ago when Trudi started blogging about it. Because it's not something I have been faced with yet in our local setting. My first thought is I never like the term non-resistance. That frames what I believe differently than what I actually believe. And I don't know the history of that term, how non-resistance came to be the term. In my growing up in the churches I've been a part of, or even at Bible schools, people teaching non-resistance, I think they were teaching something other than non-resistance and using that word, but that word kind of frames a picture that I think splashes over into our culture. What we're teaching is we don't respond to evil with violence, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of what I was taught. Like we don't actually, growing up, it wasn't even that we don't get involved in politics. My dad would have voted, and our church was a little abnormal from the conservative Anabaptist church in that we were a little more involved in politics. But for myself, I do resist. Like, we are called to resist evil, but it's how we resist. So I prefer the term nonviolent. So I'm not gonna. That kind of takes the focus off of whether or not I work with government or, you know what I mean? Like, so often when we talk about non-resistance, we kind of include not going to the government or not, Jesus talks about solving things before you get to court. And that's something where, I just feel like, man, I haven't thought about how that plays into sexual abuse. But I do believe very strongly that Jesus is an advocate for the vulnerable, and God is a God of consequence. Like, he is very much a God of grace, but he also follows through on consequence. You have David, a man after God's own heart, but he lost the kingdom because of his sin. The kingdom was divided because of his sin. And so it's not that grace or forgiveness just removes the consequence. And I think that's something that has gotten lost. What that looks like, I'm obviously still figuring out, and I think the conservative Anabaptist church has a long ways to go in what that looks like. I'm curious what Trudi's response would be on that.
I agree with the nonviolence. What you just said there about nonviolence versus non-resistance. Clearly, I resist this kind of evil. It's not necessarily comfortable for me to do what I do. I do what I do because I'm called to do it. that's why. But it's not a comfortable place for me at all. I'm a people pleaser. I like lots of friends, and I'm quite outgoing. So when God first called me to this, I'm like, are you serious? Because people hate me and I don't like that. But I am very passionate about resisting the evil against children, because it's stealing the kingdom of God. You've got the devil in the front row of church, is the picture I always get, is like he's got the front row of church, and so he's got the church of tomorrow, because these kids grow up and they have a warped view of church. They have a warped view of, I mean, maybe we all have a warped view of church, but a warped view of God, a warped view of themselves. And it's just such an inroad for all kinds of depression and anxiety and pain and trauma. So I think to say non-resistance should prevent us from resisting this kind of evil boldly and rather outspokenly does not represent Christ well. This week I heard something, though, that really made me think, and I can't even attribute to the person that it came from, because I just heard it and I don't know whose voice it is, but it was, and I don't even know if he's Anabaptist, but it was really powerful. And he was talking actually about this situation and saying how that he's definitely got an awareness of Anabaptists, by the way, because he's saying how the history of the Anabaptist church is, being persecuted and being the victim. And that role lends itself to forgiving, to being gracious. And they're very good at that part about extending the grace and forgiveness to their offenders. But what do you do when that offender is you, when it is your people, it is among you? And this forgiveness, this thing that you've taught, all of a sudden you're asking victims inside of your community to extend it to the offender inside of your community. So there isn't this understanding of how to deal with offenses in a, I would say, nonviolent way versus non-resistance. So that's been applied in the same way that they did with persecution. I just found that really fascinating.
Asher, how would you respond to what Trudi mentioned about the emphasis on women covering their bodies that is so often talked about, and how that could potentially lead to causing issues as well?
Yeah, I agree with her. I think it goes even a little beyond that, and just that we typically don't talk about our bodies, period. And so anything bodily is kind of seen as bad. And I was at a youth guys retreat a year ago talking about male sexuality, and the one session was on how, like, our desire and our longing for sexual fulfillment is actually a good thing, and it's something that God intends for us to experience and to enjoy in marriage. And there was one young man, I think he was about 18, 19 years old. He really struggled with that. He didn't think it should be, that sex should be something that you pleasure in. It's just for procreation, and
it's like a Catholic view.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and I think that's kind of a typical, my hunch would be that's a typical assumption in conservative Anabaptist world. And my wife and I have been thinking about it, talking about it a lot with our boys. We don't have any girls yet, but we have 3 boys. And how do we talk with them about their bodies? And like, this is, we feel so lost sometimes, because they're 5, 4, and 1, and at a very young age, like, they notice their body parts and they're playing around with it. And it's like, what is this normal? Like, should they be doing that? And so, like, how do you, because our reaction could be like, oh, you need to stop that. Like, don't do that. That's not good. But then that ends up kind of cultivating that this is bad, this is evil, don't talk about it, don't. And so what we've tried to do is emphasize the not create the this is bad emphasis. I mean, they're under 5, so I'm assuming a lot of their stuff is fairly innocent at this point, but discovering themselves, and rather talking about how, keeping their hands off each other, like, that's your penis, that's sacred. You don't want anybody to touch yours, and if they do, come talk to us, and you should not be touching theirs, or stuff like that, trying to create a sense of sacredness as opposed to badness. I don't know if that makes sense. Like it's we're able to talk about it, but it is special. It's a little more special than your nose or your and obviously, as our assumption is, as we get older, we talk even more in depth about sexuality and our bodies and stuff. But I think that, I guess, that doesn't address the question specifically to women covering up, but I think it kind of overlaps. Everything body is seen as bad, and I'm not sure we all know what to do with the things we feel inside when we see beauty, or when we see or even when we don't see it. We just long for sexual expression or sexual fulfillment. Like, I'm not sure in the conservative worlds if we've really processed like how to process that and what to do with those feelings. And I think that overlaps to just a overarching hush hush, this is bad. We kind of map flesh, the word, the Bible talks about flesh versus spirit. We map that onto anything flesh, as in skin and body, and I'm not sure that's an accurate depiction of what the Bible's talking about. But anyways.
Yeah, I want to talk a little more about this whole Christian Aid Ministries situation. Maybe I'll just start with you, Trudi. Could you give us an overview of everything that's happened, maybe just the major points and where we are with it today?
So I became aware early May that a young man had come, or a man, I guess I that time actually thought he was younger than he is, had come back from Haiti. That's all I knew. I did not know any other information other than that he had engaged in molesting kids. And that's kind of where it stayed for a couple of weeks. The only person that I knew had information was somebody very close to the offender and also very close to me, and I just didn't have the heart to. And they knew that if I found out, I would have to talk. Like, I won't be silent, and so I didn't pursue that information. But little bits trickled in over the next couple of weeks, and I would say it was about 2.5 to 3 weeks later that I learned he was in Ohio, and didn't know his name, but had just one person's name that gave me everything I needed to actually find out who this was. And I did. I did a little bit of research. I don't usually, and as far as details, it comes to me. But I did go to that name, and then from there, I pieced together who it was. And, I put a post on Facebook about a man named Arbaugh, who was arrested and charged last year. He was arrested, I think, a couple of years ago. And another one, Pye, P-Y-E. They were both molesting kids in Haiti and were charged last year. So I put those posts up. And I did it as kind of letting people know, if you hear this stuff, it's actually a chargeable crime. I did not bring Cam into it. I did not even mention that there's, a Cam case going on at that point. Come to think of it, I'm not even sure if I knew at that point that this guy who ended up being Jeriah Mast, that he was with Cam. But I put it out there kind of as a warning. And from that status, information just came in steady. And within no time, I just had the story. I was then asked by someone if I would consider going to Haiti to just, talk to the young man and meet with some people there about this case and to see what can be done. And if, Cam would pay for my way, would I go? And my response was, I wouldn't accept Cam paying for my way. At that point, I already knew that there was people in the organization that had known. And so I did not feel comfortable having them pay my way. And at that point, I wasn't even planning to go. But as the court case drew near, so he came home, he landed in US May 5. He was confronted May 3 by a pastor in Haiti. I don't know if he initially admitted to even one, but there was definitely denial at the very beginning. And then he admitted to more and eventually made the statement that there's more than he can count. Like when he was asked how many, it was more than he could count. And so this is now about a month later. that I've got all this information, or just under a month later, when I was asked if I would go, if Cam would pay my way. But then as the court case drew near, and it kind of seemed like nobody was going to be there to show these young men that they matter, that their story matters, that they have valid reasons for, crying out and asking for some kind of justice, retribution, redemption, whatever you want to call it, that their cries are valid. And at that point, I started getting this really strong niggling that I'm supposed to go, and it didn't make any sense because I'm too busy to go. But at that point, I put word out at noon on, I think it was June 4 or 5. It was right around there when I left. But I put word out on Facebook saying, hey, if you want to help fund a trip, it's about an abuse case. And I just kind of left it there. I didn't say who or where or why. And that was kind of my fleece, I guess you could say, to say, if the funding comes in, I will go. And by 5 p.m., we had half of it. And then a gentleman called and said, how much do you need? And I said how much we had a third of it, sorry. And a gentleman called and I said, well, we have a third of it. And he says, well, I'll give, another third. And then if you can raise the rest, well, within minutes, the rest was in. And so I bought my ticket. That evening, just a one-way ticket. Once we had enough money for a one-way ticket, I bought that. And then bought the ticket to home actually after I left home. So my husband took me to Buffalo and we flew out. The court case, it was disappointing to see that Cam didn't show up. I think when you've got an employee that has violated so many young men and you kind of thumb your nose at the government, I don't think that that's non-resistance, if we're going to use that term. It's non-violent, but it's not non-resistant, nor is it owning up to what was done wrong. And so that was really disappointing. Upon returning, I released the story the Monday after I came back. I had been there, I'd met with these young men. I asked each of them if they were comfortable with me publicizing the story. I didn't publicize their names other than one document, which was a public document. And I did that by accident. I don't know what I did wrong, but I tried to white out their names and somehow they were still there for a bit. But I did remove that. My goal was to protect their names, even though it's a public case, and make the church community, the Anabaptist community, aware of what was happening. I felt like the donors needed to know so that they could hold Cam accountable. My intent was not and is not to destroy anybody, but to say this has got to change, because I keep seeing these things. And I've been doing it for 10 years, so I can tell you countless with of exactly what we've seen here on a much smaller scale. So before each step happened, I have one friend with whom I share quite in detail things that I can share. And I would actually tell her, this is what we're going to see next. And it's that predictable, the response and the way it plays out. And that's what I'd like to see change, so that the church hears it and says, not how can we make the offender comfortable? How can we make sure he gets to repentance? Sure, put one or two people on that. But the question that should be asked is, how can we support the victims? How can we come alongside them? What do they need from us? Because they need to see Jesus in our response. And he was one to confront evil and confront injustice unapologetically in religious community and beyond, and especially in religious community. And so that was my motive for getting involved. I don't know if that kind of gives you a bit of an overview.
Yeah.
Sort of answers the question.
So the first statement that Christian Aid Ministries put out said that they did not know about the abuse, and then there was a lot of public outcry on social media, and they put out another statement stating that Paul and Eli Weaver knew about it, two of the leaders, and that they were put on leave. Is that correct?
Yes, that's how I read the statement, and that is correct. The first statement, to my understanding, was that it came from the executive committee. So the board of directors at that point, to my knowledge and my understanding, were not aware of this case, at least to any depth, even at that point. It was the executive committee handling it. And so to say Cam did not know, you can say if 98% of the people don't know, then the organization doesn't know. You could say that. You can almost justify that half-truth unless you say, but here's two of our top leaders who did know. They actually knew. And at that point, they were the only two that were named as knowing. We've since found out that a third one knew. But those two knew, and yet this statement came out saying we did not know, or CAM did not know. So if they had said we did not know as the executive committee, it would have been a lie. And I think that kind of telling the truth in half truths, I don't know what their motive was. I'm not going to judge that. That's between them and God. But it did send a message that, you know, we were totally innocent. We had no idea. And that wasn't accurate. And I think the outcry at that point was warranted.
Do you think that the outcry on social media and your blogging and other blogging is what got them eventually to put out that second statement?
Definitely the outcry of their donors. I know that they were inundated with emails and phone calls and messages from their donors and the community, you know, wanting answers. So much so that someone actually messaged me and said, could you put out another blog or put out word somehow? I don't remember if they said blog, but could you please ask people not to call about this and not to email about this, because our secretaries and receptionists can't do their work. They're too overwhelmed. And I just said, I'm sorry, I can't interfere with that. I think this process needs to play out. I think CAM needs to address this. So, yeah, I think that had a huge impact, because people were wanting answers and saying, you know, there seems to be evidence, and I have solid evidence, like undeniable, indisputable evidence that they knew, in their own words. And the public is saying, so if there's this evidence, why are we hearing this innocence that we did not know?
Yeah. So you said you know of a third official within CAM who knew about it?
Yes. I did blog about that a few days later. Yeah.
Okay. Has Christian Aid responded to that at all?
Christian Aid has not, but the leader has. He put out a statement admitting that he knew that there was something. He doesn't go into any depth or detail. My understanding from his statement is that he knew there was moral failings. I don't remember if he uses that word exactly, but that there was moral failings back in 2013, somewhere around there, when Jeriah was sent home. Around that time, I don't have the exact dates in front of me, but he was sent home. And so he would have known about that, but not details, and would have known about homosexuality, which that's what it's been called, but you can't call it. He may have homosexual tendencies and desires and struggles. That's a separate thing. Yeah. When you cross that boundary with little boys, you've got to call it what it is, and it is sexual violence against children. And I think that softening it may have, I mean, it may legitimately be that he did not know it was more than that. That I can't speak to, other than if you start doing the math. I know who the young man was who spoke with him. I know how old he was when he spoke with this leader. And it doesn't take any kind of math to say, wait a minute, that was 2013. This is how many years later? It would have been in his own words, he says he found out in 2016, end of 2016, early 2017. In his statement, he says 2017. So he may have confirmed somehow that that's when it was. But even at 2017, that would have been 4 years after 2013. So you'd have to do the math. And it doesn't take much to say, okay, if somebody's 21 today, that means that at that time, they would have been a minor. And if the assaults happened prior to that, they would have definitely been a minor. So there should have been more critical thinking. If he really was as naive and unaware as he sounds in his statement, which I will not question, that's between him and God, then I would just say that there's been an absence of critical thinking, which might have been due to, you know, this naive trust. I'm not sure. I don't know how to reconcile that.
Is it correct that his church leaders, Jeriah Mast church leaders, also knew about it?
They definitely. So first of all, you have to look at who his church leaders are. So if you go back to when he was with Faith, his older brother is a pastor at Faith, or a leader. I don't know if they call them elders or what they call them, but anyway, a leader at Faith. His dad is an elder, and definitely in the family, they knew that there was issues. That was known a long time ago. Did they know the extent of it? I can't speak to that. Did any of the victims' parents back 2023? The longest ago I know of is 23 years ago, when Jeriah was 14. Did any of the victims or their parents at that point come forward and speak with the leadership? I don't know. I have received messages from the church saying, yes, we knew. And these would be people who have left Faith and not necessarily left their faith, but left Faith Church since. There's been people who have a message to say, yeah, we absolutely knew that there was a problem. way back, and they knew. I haven't confirmed that with the Mast family or with the church leaders, so I'll extend grace there, and not what I don't have evidence to, I will not, speak to very powerfully at all.
Yeah. Will there be legal ramifications for Paul and Weaver and Paul and Eli Weaver, it is, right? And the others who knew about it?
That's a question I can't answer. I know that they're listed. Well, Cam is listed in the legal documents in Haiti. Haiti is actually very polite. Their letter asking Cam and Jeriah to come is actually it's worded as a polite invitation. We invite you. It's very kindly, respectfully, this invitation. It's going to have to move from that to a very forthright, you know what, we're going to extradite you for that to happen. So I'm not sure. And I'm not sure what the U.S. government does with something like that when there's at a corporate level, when there's organization leaders that know and don't do anything. I'm not sure. I know how they in some states handle leaders. I don't know what they do with, I've just never seen this before, so I'm not sure.
Yeah. So you're not sure what the ramifications in America would be for the leaders of CAM?
That's right.
Okay.
If they would go back and get the full extent of the law in Haiti, they would probably land in prison. That was my understanding. And in fact, the day we were there in prison, when they arrested this pastor, the part that I didn't tell that happened, I had left the room for a bit while I was out. And I was kind of sorry I missed it because it sounded quite fascinating culturally, but also just quite an experience. They went to the Caucasians there, and each one, they were like, "Are you with Cam?" And they were going to arrest whoever was there who was with Cam. It didn't matter who they were. And then the guys are there like, whoa, no, like we're with, and they would say who they're with. Like I think, actually, I don't remember for sure which programs they were with, but it wasn't with Cam. And so then they left them off the hook, but arrested this pastor who had been with Cam. He's not even with Cam, and Cam has no vested interest in him. So it was just a very fascinating, justice system to say, well, if we can't get them, we'll take who we can get.
And is that pastor still in jail?
No, they only had him in for a couple of hours, and then a gentleman, I'm guessing maybe legal counsel, I'm not sure, but a gentleman came in, spoke with him, left, had a meeting with an official, and then came back and they let him out. So he was only in for about 2 hours, but with a stern warning that if CAM officials and Jeriah do not show up within, I had understood it was 3 weeks, but somebody was explaining how their weeks and their days work, and it was actually, or 2 weeks, sorry, the way they count, like Monday to Monday is an 8-day week, and then I forget where it goes from there, but it's very, different. But it was actually 3 weeks, and then at the end of the 3 weeks, they were going to arrest this pastor again and hold him. But because of the political unrest, the case is actually on hold or postponed right now. I know that there's people in America, I won't identify them, but who are back and forth with the lawyers in Haiti and communicating with them and trying to help them navigate this, because extraditing is not something that's done. Like Ohio governor had said. So a gentleman that spoke with the Ohio governor called me afterwards and said, we've never had this before. We don't even really know what protocol is. So will they face justice? Or what is justice? I guess forget that word, because who really knows what justice means in a case like this? But will they face any sort of legal consequences? I don't know.
And Jeriah was just arrested a few days ago and pled not guilty. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Do you have any idea why he pled not guilty?
My hunch would be, you tell the truth on a technicality. If one detail is wrong, you would plead not guilty because something's, it could be that. It could be that he thinks one detail in the allegations or the charges is not accurate. Or it could simply be a legal move. It could just simply be, I went in to confess thinking that, nobody wants to press charges and this is just all going to go away and I'm going to be, legally free from this. Never expecting it to go public, because what's Haiti going to do to make this public? And if the victims that he had in Ohio aren't going to come forward, then it all just kind of goes away quietly, which was the hope. But this kind of wrecked that plan when everything went public, because now all of a sudden that go to confess and walk away free doesn't work. So then you have to go to plan B, and the only way to fight it is to plead not guilty. If he pleads guilty at this point, he doesn't stand a chance. So that's my analysis of it. I can't tell you for sure what is going through his mind.
Mhm.
So, uh, just a quick question here. None of the victims in Ohio have come forward.
Here's what I'm not sure about. After I released the blog, several victims contacted me from Ohio.
Okay.
Um, one of them is definitely listed in that
Mm,
in the
mhm,
charges there. The other four, I don't know if they were ones that Jeriah had spoken with. That I don't know.
mm.
Or are they the ones he confessed to and then told the law about,
Yeah,
or are they some of the ones that came forward because of the publicity? That I don't know for sure.
yeah. Hmm.
Yeah, Asher, what are your thoughts on the behavior of Christian Aid Ministries, and maybe what could be done better next time something like this comes up, or even to prevent it from coming up in the first place?
Yeah. Well, I have a lot of questions too, so I don't know if I have many thoughts. Like, excuse me. When I first saw, soon after I saw the article come out, Trudi started. It may have been after a couple articles, I forget. Um, Part of what I didn't even realize it was you, Trudy, that was writing. I read the first article. I must not have gotten to the very bottom where your name is there, and uh, and then I read another article, I forget, and I was just like, wow, like this is crazy. What's going on? And I saw other people that I trust and respect sharing the articles, and then somewhere I shared an article. Yeah, I hadn't written about it yet. Oh, it must have been the same day because I wrote about it on that day. Um, but somewhere in there, I shared an article and somebody's like, well, "That's Trudi Metzger," and so I was like, "Oh, who's Trudi Metzger?" I didn't really. And so it soon became apparent that there's a lot of people don't take you because you're not uh, you don't wear covering or whatever. I don't know what all the issues are, but what got me serious about the case was seeing people who I trust and respect. Like they're not just gonna go spread a uh I don't know, what do you call it? Like popular popularizing like a small thing or whatever. Like this is serious. And eventually, a few days later, I emailed someone, a mentor of mine who works in Haiti, not with Cam, but I was pretty sure he would have pretty good insight as to whether or not this is true. And he was universally, like he said, the articles, I think you had released two at that point. He said the facts, those articles are indeed factual, I think was his response. And then I we had some going back and forth. I think he was traveling at the time, um and somewhere in there he just said in his perspective Cam has made some huge mistakes. And he knows some of these victims himself. And that's what made me like, okay, so this is a legit story. And there's seriously something going on here. I know some of the names. I don't know them personally on the board, like on the Cam board. I haven't reached out to any of them yet. I did reach out to Cam. I was one of the people emailing them. um, but I guess like I've been thinking about it a lot, having been a part of organizations much smaller, but and being a part of conflict, like some tricky situations. Like I know how the thing that I kept processing before things were confirmed to me more by people I knew. The thing I kept processing was like, so a lot of people were getting after Cam for not releasing a statement earlier, uh, not talking about it. And my, sorry, I lost my train of thought. I'm trying to think.
Did I mess you up with the message I sent?
Yeah, you did.
I sent David a message on here, and I think it got Asher derailed.
Let me pick my thoughts back up here. So what I was thinking initially was, yeah, back before I knew, like, so what if this just came to CAM? You know, what if the CAM leadership just found out about this in the last 3 months or so? From an organizational perspective, I understand, like, holding off and trying to, like, figure out, like, how deep is this? How, you know, what, you know, where all does this go? And so I was a little defensive, at least with, like, close friends as we were discussing this. I was a little defensive of some of the leadership. But then as it became more apparent and as it came out that there were people, and that's one thing my mentor mentioned, was that there were people in administration there. I don't, were Paul and Eli, do they work down in Haiti, or they're stateside, or how is
So Paul and Eli would be the top two go-to people. What exactly their title is, I don't remember because I don't have it in front of me. But yeah, they would be the top two go-to people in Haiti.
in Haiti? Okay.
And Paul, I believe, is the top, but I'm second guessing that which one is at the top.
Yeah.
But they are the two. Yes.
Yeah. And so then it's like, you know, to me that's ridiculous. And the fact that it goes back to 13 or 12, whenever it was, 2012. Like, there's no excuse for that. There's no yeah, this isn't just trying to get your bearings as you figure out what to do with this. I think it would have been in Cam's best interest, as soon as they found out about it, to release a statement and to say, hey, we're looking into this. We care deeply about the victims and about finding justice or whatever, to solve this. But there again, if the two top people who know about it are covering it up, that changes things. And in my opinion, they should never again work for CAM. They should never again work for an organization like that. But
well, there's an interesting part to that whole covering up thing and not knowing. It would seem as though they did not pass it on to the board for sure. And I'm not sure if the whole executive board knew even back in 2013. But there are people coming forward, and I will not name them, who are saying, but we knew, how did they not? So there's other leaders out there who were told back in 2013 and say, we knew, we knew, and not connected with CAM that I know of, but other people were told. So there was obviously enough conversation to not hide it from everybody. You told some people, so why not the board? Why not the rest of CAM? And why was he allowed to go back when, so a friend of mine, she's a Facebook friend, I've met her once in the real world, her daughter was sent home, and I mean, just had affections, I guess you could say, for a Haitian gentleman. There was nothing untoward that happened. There was nothing inappropriate that happened, and she was sent home. Others were sent home for porn. One young man was sent home because he had sexual relations with a young girl. So why was this case different? I think one of the keys to figuring out how to prevent this is figure out, why was this case different? Why, when it was homosexuality, why, when it was children, was he allowed to go back when others weren't? And I think that question deserves an answer. And I think it's key, actually, to addressing the problem, as far as why was that, I want to call it, it's not discrimination, but you know what I mean? Why was it handled different? I can't think of the word I'm looking for. Yeah.
Well, maybe we can get you on here with one of CAM's leaders, Trudi.
Yeah, I've said I'd be willing to sit down with them. I had a gentleman from the Charity Fellowship ask me, would you be willing to sit down with them? I said, absolutely. I couldn't go to them before. I've done this for 10 years, and I know how that works. As much as my instincts would be, sit down and talk, I know how that works, and especially when there's been a cover-up. If they had not known, then it would have been different. But because I had evidence that they knew since 2013, there was just sitting down to talk it out wasn't the solution. That would have just interfered with it coming forward, and I don't think that's helpful. But yeah, I'd definitely be willing. If they're willing to talk, I am.
Yeah. Well, go ahead, Asher.
Oh, I was just gonna say, so they aren't willing to talk.
I haven't heard back since I was
Okay.
asked. I don't know the answer to that question.
Yeah.
Yeah, as we sort of wrap up here, I did want to talk a little bit about what the proper response is for a pastor or a youth worker or anyone who has been approached and told that that they're being sexually abused. Because I think one of the issues within the conservative Mennonite world, within the Catholic Church, within a lot of these groups, is that it's sort of handled in house. If we're the body of Christ, if this person has repented, we need to forgive them. God forgives everyone. Any situation can be restored, and the law is not brought into the situation. So would you guys say that the proper response is always to report sexual abuse immediately, and even if it's in some places you legally have to, but even if it's not in the law that you would need to do that, would you guys say that would be the proper response?
You go for it, Trudy, because I am.
He wants to hear you and then just agree with you.
No. The reason I asked that is because I'm curious too. Like we deal with a lot of unchurched people, unchurched backgrounds, and so their stories come out and they've been sexually molested. Just the week of your article coming out, a girl came up to us in the park and talked about she was kicked out of her house because she put her mom's boyfriend in prison for having sex with her, and she was 18, and then there was some mental issues there that people are not believing her because she's mental, and we're wondering like, what if this has been her life? Is that why she's mental? Anyways, all of that. But like, I don't know what to do with. In that we found out she has a 16-year-old sister who is living with a 34-year-old boyfriend and pregnant. But that's all, like the sister wants to be there with her and with the boyfriend. And so, but she's a minor. So is there a legality that we're responsible for in reporting that? Like all of that is new to us. If it was within the church and I know somebody is sexually molesting someone underage, I mean, I think I would do it if someone is sexually molesting someone, period. But I don't think so. I did call the cops to talk with them about it, and they were like, well, she's got to come in and report it. Like, we can't go on your word. And so that was news to me, or I was learning something as I go there. But I think it's crucial from my young experience. I think it's crucial that we do report these. I don't think we end there. Like obviously the church can offer something that the world that doesn't know Christ can't offer. But that's a huge part of dealing with the issue. But I'd love to hear Trudy's thoughts.
So it depends what state or region or province you're in. Just for starters, I would say people need to educate themselves because ignorance doesn't get you off the hook. So when you're sitting in front of that cop, that's not going to matter. So I would say the starting point is educate yourself about your particular laws wherever you are. And even at that, like Asher said, you've got the 16-year-old girl with this 30-some-year-old guy. The law isn't necessarily going to do much if they want to be there. Clearly it's her choice, but in some places they will. So I'm actually kind of surprised. I don't know for sure where you live, Asher, but I'm a little bit surprised that California. Okay.
Oh, you can get away with anything there.
Yeah, I was gonna say, that explains everything. I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. So in some states they would definitely be checking that out, and there would be charges, but not necessarily consistently, because I have a friend whose daughter was assaulted. I think she was like 16 or 15, and the guy was 19, and that one just fell through the cracks. And they just, I mean, it went to court, but it just fell through. So you're not going to see consistent legal response. And I don't try to control that. I will give officers what information I have that's valid, but it's not my duty to make sure that they follow through and do their part. I do mine. So I would say if it's legally required, I have some really good anarchist friends who think I'm nuts for saying you go to the law, but I mean, my degree is on the line if I don't. I'm a mandated reporter no matter where I go. And so I have to go to the law. If it's a minor, even if they want to be in that situation, that I can't speak to, but I still have to report them. And then whatever happens, happens. So that would be the starting point. Definitely, if it's a minor, it should be reported. Can I say this publicly? I think I'm going to. I'm not a fan of CPS in many situations. There are some really good social workers. There's some excellent, workers, but the system, I don't like how some of it works. I'll just be really honest. I think it needs a solid overhaul. Nonetheless, it is the law in some places to report to them as well. And so I would say follow the law. Do what you are called to do. I believe Romans 13 applies to me too. And so I do the legal duty that I have to do, but I don't think it should end there. I will say this. I do not see the law as the answer. I see it as the only thing that we have right now because the church has failed. I would love to see the church rising up and responding differently. Like when I hear about these committees, the Amish Steering Committee in Ohio, I hear about the conservative crisis intervention committees with the Old Order and the Amish and the Eastern and more conservative churches in Pennsylvania, and I see them trying to work with the victims in the law. I look at that and I go, that could be ideal. It's not, because it's so geared towards the offenders and it's so void of helping victims and really bringing their voice to the table, saying, you know what, let's meet with the victims first. What do you need? What do you need from us? What do you need from the law? What do you need from the church? And to bring that voice into play and actually honor them, rather than this being this mediation between the offender and the law, so that the offender 3/4 of the time gets off the hook, a quick excommunication, and we're good to go again. It doesn't do the offender any service at all. If we would hold the offenders to the wall, not because we hate them, not because we want them to go to hell, not because we want them to rot in jail, but because we believe that if they can come clean, completely, 100%, like to the breaking point where they actually face it all, that is their one shot at freedom. And that's the part the church should be doing and isn't. And so, yes, report, but like Asher said, I definitely agree. It is not the answer or the solution. To go there and leave it there is very much like, Pilate washing his hands saying, I've done my part. That's not what the church is for.
Yeah, Trudi encouraged us to educate ourselves. And David, I asked you to look into what our local Virginia laws are in situations like this. So for anyone who's from our state, Virginia here, David, what are Virginia's laws on, let's say you're a pastor or a youth worker and someone comes to you and tells you that you've been sexually abused? Are you required to report that under the threat of punishment if you do not?
Yes, you are. What's interesting is, I don't know if you remember the Jordan Bard case that just happened a couple years ago in Virginia, but this inspired 2 bills that came through in Virginia. And it's, as Trudi was saying, it's 26 different states in the U.S. have similar bills like this. So it does depend on your state. But this girl reported to the pastor that the pastor's son, who was the youth leader, and this is the church I met my wife at, guys.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so it hits close to home. She reported it to the pastor, and the pastor said, okay, we'll investigate. Well, nothing really happened, right? So they were sick of it, so they left the church, went to the police, and at the time, Virginia was the person has to bring it to the police. But now, since Jordan got convicted and they did their investigation, because that's how it works, they do an investigation. Once a crime is committed, they do the investigation, they do the litigation, right? So basically, there's a bill, it's called HB 659 and SB 1257 if people want to look it up. But basically, it requires now that if a person goes to leadership and reports a sexual crime or a child abuse, any type of child abuse, that they have to report it immediately. So there's no escape room here unless it comes to them by confessional. So if they go and do it in confidence, the church is allowed to deal with it that way. But if the parents, like in that situation, come up to a pastor and say, "Hey, your son has molested my daughter," and sending her these messages, then they have to report it immediately. If they don't, they can be charged too.
Okay. Yeah, we'll include that bill in the show notes so anyone can fact check us and look it up. But like Trudi said, I'd encourage you, if you're listening to this from another state or province, to look up your local laws. And even if it's not in law, I would encourage you very strongly to report it anyways. I lean toward Christian anarchism myself, but in situations like this, throw out anarchism, go to the government. I mean, this type of crap needs to get shut down. Yeah, I'd like to kind of wrap up here by saying that, of course, all of us, I'm sure, would agree that we don't hate Jeriah Mast, and we wish the best for him in terms of repentance, and for the others in Christian Aid Ministries who knew about this. We hope that they repent. We love them, and we're praying for them. And also, of course, we don't want to throw shade on conservative Anabaptism. I grew up Beachy Amish Mennonite, and this is a human situation. It's not a problem within any specific denomination necessarily, but it definitely has infiltrated every part of our culture. And so I'm glad to see people like you, Trudi, and Asher, who have a voice within this world, rising up and standing for victims. And eternity will show how much that has done for our communities and for victims in general. So thanks a lot, guys, for coming on the show. And all those of you who are listening, make sure to subscribe, and we will see you all next time.
Thanks for having me.
Yep.
Thank you.